You have something to fall back on if times are tough. But if you're broke, if you have nothing, what are you going to do? I've tried my best to warn people, things are going to be so bad. This financial crisis that we're headed for is worse than the one we had in 2008. It's going to make 2008 look like a Sunday school picnic. Take your money out of the bank. Don't leave it there. You're going to lose it one way or the other. They don't care about the country. They care about themselves. Stocks are so extremely overpriced right now. They have to collapse. Any day you go to sleep, you could wake up and it could be a whole new world. We screwed the world over in 1971. We defaulted on our commitment. We promised to pay gold, and then we told our creditors we're paying nothing. We basically just said these checks are no good. We made a commitment and we're defaulting on it. Now, the dollar went down a lot during the 1970s. It lost about 2/3 of its value relative to other fiat currencies like the Deutsche Mark
People
or the
didn't
Swiss franc.
de-dollarize then. When the U.S. broke the relationship to gold, why didn't a currency rise at that moment that was tied to gold?
There really weren't many currencies left that were still tied to gold because they were tied to the dollar, and then the dollar detethered, from gold. But what happened was the dollar lost a lot of value during the 70s, right? The Swiss franc went from 25 cents to 75 cents. The yen, it went from 360 yen to the dollar to maybe about 150. I think the Deutsche Mark, we used to get 4 marks to the dollar, then it went down to like 1.5. The dollar got marked down. Oil went from $3 a barrel to $30 a barrel in the 70s. Gold went from 35 to 800, right? So the dollar lost a lot of value. And that meant every American got poorer in the 1970s. That's the main reason that so many women started working in the 1970s. During the 1960s, if you were a married woman, most of you didn't have a job. Your husband could support you. It didn't even matter what kind of job, blue collar job. He supported his wife. But inflation was so high and people's money lost so much value that in order to pay the bills, the wife had to get a job. It wasn't like, oh, women felt liberated, so they decided to work. They were liberated when they didn't have to work. They were forced to work because their husbands couldn't support them anymore because of the inflation. But the dollar did stabilize in the 80s. With the very high interest rates under Volcker, rates went to 20%, and Reagan came in and, we kind of like saved the dollar, got a reprieve. But now I think the de-dollarization is going to be complete because the other thing that happened to support the dollar was the petrodollar. So what happened is we went off the gold standard. So there was no longer any gold. We made a deal with Saudi Arabia to price oil in dollars. Say, hey, we'll defend you. We'll defend your regime. We'll keep your enemies at bay. You just price your oil in our currency. So now all of a sudden we did create a use for the dollar because if you wanted oil, which everybody wanted, you needed dollars to pay for it. So that also really helped support the dollar. But the petrodollar now, unless you're blind, is on its way out. A lot of these countries are trying to figure out how to bilaterally deal oil in currencies other than the US dollar. When the world moves away from the dollar totally, then the collapse is going to continue. It started in 1970. It's going to continue. We're going to see a huge erosion of purchasing power, but it's going to be even worse. The economy today, the U.S. economy, is in much worse shape than it was in 1970. I mean, we were a creditor nation in 1970. Even in 1980, we were still a creditor nation. That meant the world owed us a lot more than we owe the world. Today, not only are we the biggest debtor nation, we owe more money than all the other debtor nations in the world combined. Back even in the mid-1980s, America still had trade surpluses. Our factories were productive enough that we exported more than we imported. Now we have the biggest trade deficits in the world, biggest trade deficit ever. So the economy is a shadow of what it was.
Why does that matter? What's the problem?
If you get into trouble, do you want to have, a nest egg to fall back on? We save for a rainy day, right? You don't borrow for a rainy day. Why do you build up a rainy day fund? So you have something to fall back on if times are tough. But if you're broke, if you have nothing, what are you going to do? We are vulnerable. We're no longer self-reliant the way we used to be. I mean, the economy is all screwed up. And I think that the decade ahead is going to be a lot more challenging than was the 1970s. It's going to be a much bigger adjustment. Now, obviously, women can't start working. They're already working. So it's not like we have a spare laborer that can pick up the slack like we had back then. We have more technology now. That's a positive. And now the whole specter of AI, that could help out. I mean, that could help increase productivity there. I just don't think it's a get out of jail free card, that it's going to be like a miracle thing, but I think it's going to help. And a lot of other technologies that we have will help. But the problem is government. Because I'm afraid that instead of getting out of the way, which is what you need, right? We're in a mess. Capitalism is our only way out. The free market. We could work our way out of this hole, right, that the government put us in. But if the government reacts to this problem with even more government, more regulation, more spending, there's no way out. We're just going to be impoverished until there's a violent revolution. Who knows when that's going to be?
Can you imagine any scenario where government actually gets smaller?
Yes, only in a scenario where things get better, because it's actually inversely proportionate. Prosperity is inversely proportionate to the size of government. The smaller the government, the more prosperous the society. And the bigger the government, the less prosperous. You compare. You have countries where they split it. East Germany, West Germany, South Korea, North Korea, right? Look at these countries where you take the exact same society and just cut it in half, and you have one that's socialist and one that's more capitalist. Which one has a higher standard of living? Which one does better? Who did better? Communist China or Taiwan or Hong Kong? China didn't start doing well until they started adopting free market capitalism. If you go back to the 1970s and say, hey, where was it better, in mainland China or Taiwan? Taiwan. Yes. It was better in Hong Kong. Why? Because mainland China was run by the communists. It wasn't until really the 1990s that the communists realized that communism doesn't work. They didn't come out and tell the people it didn't work, because you still have the Communist Party, but they started changing the nature of the economy to allow entrepreneurship, to allow private ownership of the means of production. That's what made China what it is today. It was as capitalism came into. I'm not defending communism. All I'm saying is that as China became more capitalistic, their standard of living went up. Before they did that, there was a lot more capitalism in Taiwan or in Hong Kong. You had the same basic, Chinese people there, but they did much better. Their living standards were much higher. Until we have a lot of pain and suffering, nothing's going to change. And as long as the government can bail everybody out by printing money, they're going to do it. If I'm right, and I'm convinced that I am, and we have massive inflation that hopefully doesn't become hyperinflation, but it could, things are going to be so bad that people may finally have enough of a belly full of government that they just puke it all out, and that a message of economic freedom actually works. Some people like me and other people, and we have the internet and we have a way of communicating to let people know, hey, the government did this. The government is not part of the solution. The government is the problem, right? That's what Ronald Reagan used to say, right? The government isn't the solution. The government is the problem.
You have already done the inflation. The person has been shot, they are bleeding out, but somehow they don't recognize yet that they have been shot. So inflation is coming for you. As the Fed tries to manage that inflation by raising rates, they're probably going to chicken out. They're going to try to cut or something, but the second they try to cut, inflation is going to rear its ugly head again. Then as inflation starts happening and they realize that they're no longer going to be able to cut rates, you're going to start raising rates. As they raise the rates to try to tamp that back down, then treasuries are going to take off, bonds are going to tank. We're going to see interest rates going up. People are going to leave the stock market because it's going to be very hard for you to get that kind of yield that you can get in a treasury bill, which is nice and safe. Just park my money with the government. It's yielding copious amounts of money. And when that happens, they're also going to flee regional banking. Now, this is where the scary part starts. As they flee regional banks, which are insolvent, as far as I can tell, regional banks then are going to be they're going to start collapsing. The government's going to step in. They're going to print the shit out of money. They're going to inflate it again. And as they inflate the money supply, they're going to have to raise rates again, which is going to pull people out of regional banks even faster. It's going to pull people out of the stock market. So everything consolidates into like 4 way too big to fail banks. The stock market struggles for God knows how long. And now everybody's putting their money into T-bills, but that's the government that you're now betting on. And if you're right and de-dollarization is happening like crazy, the BRICS nations are creating a new currency, or threatening to, that's backed by gold. And so now your own thesis comes back to haunt us as Americans. And people are like, holy shit, you're inflating this thing to deal with the regional banking collapse. And now we've got, oh, hey, this other thing over here, which is backed by gold.
Found this video insightful? Hit subscribe, turn the bell on, smash that thumbs up, and dive into the links in the description below. Join our vibrant community to ensure you never miss a video. Your generous support fuels our passion. Thank you for watching. We love you.